The wind howled through the canyon like a chorus of mourning spirits, echoing the screams that no one came to answer. In the small desert town of Elmridge, tales of cruelty often settled like dust, quiet, suffocating, and forgotten. But one story refused to be buried, the story of a girl named Clara, barely 18, who stood against a corrupt sheriff and paid a price no one should ever pay. Clara Jane Thompson had always been a light in a town dimmed by fear. With chestnut hair that caught the sun like copper flames and a heart brimming with kindness, she spent her days helping at the local church and feeding strays behind her family's struggling general store. But kindness was not the currency of survival in Elmridge, power was. And no one had more of it than Sheriff Wade Harlan. Sheriff Harlan was a man twice Clara's age with an ego that dwarfed the canyon cliffs. He wanted Clara, not for love, but possession. He had made his intentions known, and the town watched silently, most too afraid to oppose him. When Clara refused him with grace and firm dignity, he gave her family a week to come to their senses. But Clara stood her ground. And then she vanished. The sheriff claimed she'd run off with a traveler. A lie soaked in smugness. But Mrs. Esther Miller, the town seamstress who'd seen Sheriff Harlan drag Clara toward the Mesa Ridge at dusk, knew better. She whispered her suspicions to a few close souls, and one of them happened to be Luke McAllister, the struggling rancher who lived just outside town. Luke was a man of few words and many debts. After his parents' passing, he'd inherited nothing but acres of dry land and fading dreams. Yet despite the weight on his shoulders, Luke never turned away a hungry neighbor or a wandering orphan. He had once seen Clara kneel to feed a dying dog near the well, her hands trembling but determined, and something in that moment had stayed with him. He owed her nothing. But when he heard the whispers, he felt something shift in his gut, something that wouldn't let him stay silent. He rode to the cliffs that night, under a blood-moon sky, and searched with nothing but a lantern and prayer. Hours passed. Just as he was ready to give up, a soft cry floated through the night, weak, broken, but alive. At the edge of the canyon, clinging to a jagged ledge with bloodied hands and a torn dress, was Clara. She had been thrown over, but her fall was broken by a tangle of brush halfway down. Her ankle was shattered, her ribs bruised, but her spirit, unbroken. Luke pulled her up with trembling arms and tears streaking his dust-covered face. "You held on," he whispered. "You held on." And Clara, barely conscious, whispered back, "I had to." He took her to his ranch and cared for her in secret. For days, Clara drifted between pain and sleep, until finally, she opened her eyes fully and asked the one question Luke wasn't ready for. "Does anyone know I'm alive?" "No," he said quietly. "Not yet." Fear clutched Clara's heart. If the sheriff knew she'd survived, he'd try again. Luke saw it in her eyes, and made a decision that would change everything. He rode into town that Sunday, walking straight into the church where Harlan sat with smug assurance, pretending to mourn a girl he'd tried to kill. Luke stood at the pulpit and said loudly, "Clara Jane Thompson is alive, and she told me what happened." Gasps. Cries. A shiver ran through the congregation. Sheriff Harlan stood, hand on his holster, eyes blazing. "You're lying." But Luke wasn't afraid. "She has bruises on her arms, shaped like your fingers. Her ankle is twisted from the fall you gave her. And her spirit is stronger than your threats." People began to murmur. Esther Miller stood. "I saw you take her to the cliffs, Wade." The sheriff's face turned pale, but he drew his gun. In that one moment, the town stood at a crossroad, fear or courage. And it was Luke who stepped forward. "Unarmed," he said, "you can shoot me. But you'll have to shoot the truth, too. And bullets don't kill truth." Someone else stood up, Mr. Granger, the blacksmith. Then the baker. Then the teacher. One by one, the people of Elmridge rose, refusing to let fear rule them anymore. The sheriff looked around and saw what he hadn't expected, unity. His power crumbled in that instant, not with fists or fire, but with the quiet strength of a town that had found its voice. He was arrested that afternoon, taken away by the state marshals after Luke rode to the next county with Clara's testimony. She appeared in court, a crutch beneath her arm and a flame in her soul, and spoke clearly about what had been done to her. Sheriff Harlan was sentenced to 20 years, and Elmridge breathed free for the first time in decades. But the real story, the one people still tell today, is what happened after. Clara didn't return to the general store. She moved to the ranch, where the wildflowers grew, and the sun rose over land that no longer felt heavy with sorrow. She and Luke worked the earth side by side, planting more than seeds, planting hope. Word spread, and others came. A boy orphaned by sickness. A mother fleeing abuse. A veteran with nowhere to go. The ranch became more than a home. It became a haven. One spring morning, under the same tree where Clara first stood on her crutches, she took Luke's hand and whispered, "You didn't just save me. You believed me when no one else would." Luke smiled. "You held on when most would have let go. How could I not believe in someone that strong?" They were married that fall, not in a grand hall but in the barn, beneath twinkling lights and surrounded by people whose lives they had quietly changed. Years later, a visitor to Elmridge once asked an old man at the cafe, "What turned this place around?" The old man smiled and said, "An 18-year-old girl who held on. And a poor rancher who listened to her scream." Because in the end, it wasn't money or might that changed Elmridge, it was courage and compassion. It was one girl's refusal to be owned, and one man's refusal to stay silent. Together, they proved that even the deepest wounds can be healed with truth, and that the strongest kind of power is love. And that's the kind of story that stays with you. Long after the last word. Long after the last tear. Because deep down, we all need to believe that no matter how cruel the world gets, kindness, when brave enough, can change everything.